Hello and welcome to Supposedly Fun. This is an exciting day because the Booker Longlist has been announced, and I am here to react to it and talk about the books that made the list, the Booker dozen. We will take a closer look at all of them. This is an interesting list. Last year was my bitter Booker year. That's what I called it because basically I was really into Demon Copperhead. I was so excited when that won the Pulitzer Prize. Then I was really excited when it won the Women's Prize. And I knew it wouldn't win the Booker, but I really wanted it to be on the long list at least, and then it wasn't. And to be honest, I just wasn't really interested in a lot of the books that were on the long list, so I didn't really catch up to them or read them. It was just my bitter Booker year. And I was very curious to see if this year would snap back. And I do feel pretty interested in some of these. There are some that are a little unfamiliar to me, so I'm going to be looking at them for the first time when we go through these books. Basically, I like to look at long lists and best of lists and things like that as tools of discovery. It helps me find books and authors that I might not have otherwise read, and it helps me maybe reconsider books that I had some resistance to or had sort of passed by. And that will definitely come into play with one of these books, because one of these books is something that I am pretty sure I saw in Irish bookstores and didn't really consider picking up. And now it's here on the Booker long list, and when I look a little more closely at it, maybe I'll reconsider and maybe I'll actually think about reading it for myself. These are not book reviews. I feel like I should clarify that, because every once in a while people will comment when I don't mention this, and they'll say, how can you review books that you haven't read? That's irresponsible. I'm not trying to review these books. I am simply talking about books that I feel interested in. I'm going to look at the list and talk about them in terms of interest and whether or not their presence on the long list has sparked an interest in it, or if they were something that I already wanted to read, or if they are something that I have already read. There are 2 books on this list that I have read, and there are a couple that I was already interested in, so we will get to all of the books in a moment. First, I should mention my dog Teddy is asleep on the floor next to me, and he is snoring, so if you hear snoring, it's him. Now, it's interesting because since I think it was 2014, that was the first year that they opened up the Booker Prize to books published in the English language, which allowed American authors to be considered. And there has been a lot of grumbling since then about American authors having such a presence on the list. I feel like this year we are going to hear a lot about that, because there are 6 American authors on the list, including the first Native American author to be on the long list for the Booker Prize. Obviously, I definitely think it's cool that the first Native American author has been longlisted for the prize. And my initial thought when I saw that Tommy Orange is the first Native American author longlisted for the prize is that, well, it's about time Louise Erdrich has been out there. And then I remembered, well, really, Americans have only been eligible for the last decade. So I guess it's not that surprising, although she has published books in that time period. Oh well. But that is a huge landmark, and there are only, I believe, 2 authors who are actually British on the list. So I do feel like this is a year where we're going to start hearing a lot of discourse about Americans being eligible for the Booker Prize. I think part of the bitterness over Americans being allowed is that the biggest American book prize is the Pulitzer, which is closed to anyone but Americans. It is what it is. And I haven't seen any other reactions yet. I'm filming this the morning that the long list was announced, so I haven't even really had time to watch anything else before I started filming my own video. But I do feel like this is a year where we are going to be seeing a lot of conversations about Americans and their presence on the list, and just how dominant this list is with American authors. So here are some facts from the Booker Prize website. This list includes 3 debut novels, 6 previously nominated writers. And speaking of the Pulitzer Prize, just a note, Edmund Duvall is the chair of the jury, but Yi-Yoon Lee is on the jury. And Yi-Yoon Lee was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize for fiction for a story collection called Wednesday's Child. And I'll have my link to the Pulitzer Prize reaction that I did in the description box down below if you would like to check that out and get more about her. Now, this list features Blackley comic page-turners, multi-generational epics, meditations on the pain of exile, plus a crime caper, a spy thriller, an unflinching account of girls boxing, and a reimagining of a 19th century classic. And the judges' selection includes strong new voices, including 3 debut novels, alongside international best-selling authors and 6 writers previously nominated for the prize, the first Dutch and first Native American authors to be longlisted, the first Australian in 8 years, 1 British Libyan writer, and authors from Canada, the UK, Ireland, and the US. A strong showing of Americans displays a range of experience from a first-time novelist to the author of more than 20 novels. There are 8 women and 5 men on the long list. There are the first nominations for Pan Macmillan imprint Mantle and 4 nominations for Jonathan Cape in the imprint's first long listing since 2019. And finally, there are works of fiction that inhabit ideas by making us care deeply about people and their predicaments, according to Chair of Judges Edmund Duval, who adds that these are works that have, quote, made a space in our hearts and that we want to see find a place in the reading lives of many others, end quote. And with that, let's get into the actual long list. The first one is something that I am very much looking forward to reading, and actually just brought in a copy into my library. It's Wandering Stars by Tommy Orange. This is the book by the first Native American author to have made it onto the long list. And I am so keen to read this book because of Tommy Orange's previous novel, There, which was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction. I read it and I really liked it. It was one of my favorite books from that year. And Wandering Stars has a connection to There. It's not strictly a sequel and it's not strictly a prequel, but it does involve characters and continuations of some of the stories from There. And that is really interesting. So let's read what the Booker website has about this book. And it says, a tender, shattering story of generations of a Native American family struggling to find ways through displacement, addiction, and pain towards home and hope. Following its unforgettable characters through almost 2 centuries of history, from the horrors of the Sand Creek Massacre of 1865 to the aftermath of a mass shooting in the early 21st century, Wandering Stars is an indelible novel of America's war on its own people. Readers of Orange's classic debut, There will know some of these characters and will be eager to learn what happened to Orville Redfeather after the Oakland powwow. New readers will discover a wondrous novel of poetry, music, rage, and love from one of the most astonishing voices of his generation. I'm really looking forward to reading this. I was already interested in reading it, and I didn't quite consider it when I was thinking about, in my own head, books that might potentially make it onto the long list. I didn't do a list of predictions. I save all of my prediction energy for the Pulitzer Prize, and I think this could potentially be something we'll be talking about when we do Pulitzer Prize predictions next year. I think for sure it will, actually. But there are a couple of other books on this list that will also be in that conversation, which is going to be interesting because the Pulitzer doesn't necessarily like books to have fingerprints from other prizes on it. So part of me wonders if this book and the other one that will potentially really be in the conversation for the Pulitzer could be damaged by being on the Booker long list, but yeah, they'll be fine ultimately because being on the Booker long list is a huge honor in and of itself. I think my only hesitation about this one was that I did actually kind of think to myself, has a Native American author been longlisted for the Booker? And today I got my answer. No, they had not. But today one has. And I'm glad that it's Tommy Orange, and I'm glad that this book made it. I am really looking forward to reading it. The next book that is on the long list for the Booker Prize is Wild Houses by Colin Barrett. This is the book that I'm pretty sure I saw in Irish bookstores and did not pick up. I think I didn't pick it up because it sounds like a bit of a mystery thriller sort of book, and I have really had bad luck with mysteries and thrillers and crime capers and all that manner of thing over the last decade. And I've sort of moved away from the genre a lot. When I want to read something escapist, I tend to read a queer romance these days. I just haven't really enjoyed the crime books, but this did sound interesting. I remember the jacket, And I'm pretty sure I picked it up and looked at it and then put it down because of what it's about. But now I am sort of rethinking that. And let's see what the Booker Prize website says about this book, and then you'll understand. A story of two outsiders striving to find themselves as their worlds collapse in chaos and violence. Wild Houses is the first novel from award-winning writer Colin Barrett. As Ballina prepares for its biggest weekend of the year, the simmering feud between small-time dealer Killian English and County Mayo's fraternal enforcers Gabe and Sketch Ferdia spills over into violence and an ugly ultimatum. When the reclusive Dev answers his door on Friday night, he finds Doll, Killian's teenage brother, in the clutches of Gabe and Sketch. Jostled by his nefarious cousins and goaded by his dead mother's dog, Dev is drawn headlong into the Ferdia's revenge fantasy. Meanwhile, 17-year-old Nikki can't shake the feeling something bad has happened to her boyfriend Doll. Hungover, reeling from a fractious Friday night, and plagued by ghosts of her own, Nikki sets out on a feverish mission to save Doll, even as she questions her future in Ballina. And it sounds really interesting. I do think this is something where I am still going to wait to see feedback from other people, because the thing about the Booker Prize is a lot of people read the entire long list and get that excited about this prize. So even though its presence on the Booker long list already has me thinking, I didn't get this book when I was in Ireland, I am still going to wait and see what ultimate feedback from other people is about this book. I could very well end up interested in reading it, but I feel like I'm going to wait and see what other people think when they begin reading this novel. The next book on the Booker long list for 2024 is Held by Anne Michaels. Now, Anne Michaels is mostly notable as a winner of the Women's Prize, back when the Women's Prize was known as the Orange Prize, for the novel Fugitive Pieces, which I have had in my library. Let's see, because I actually still have the sticker from Borders on the back of the book, and it is dated November 26, 2002. So that is when this book would have been stickered at the Borders store, and I would have purchased it sometime after that. So this book has been in my library for about 20 years, and I still have not read it, and I would really like to. And for that reason, the fact that I've been wanting to read this for so long, I do feel like Held's presence on the long list mostly serves as a reminder to me that Fugitive Pieces is something that I really need to get around to reading. However, I remember seeing Held when it was published here in the US, and by the way, I will have links to all of these on bookshop.org when they are available in the United States. Some of them might be pre-ordered. I haven't double-checked to see if all of them are readily available in the United States. And I know at least one of these books has not been released yet. But anyway, there will be links to all of these books on bookshop.org. And there will be links to the other books that I'm talking about as well, including Fugitive Pieces. So I remember when Held came out and was published in the US, and it did look interesting, but again, mostly it just served to me as a reminder, like, oh, right, I need to read Fugitive Pieces. So here is what it says on the Booker website. In a narrative that spans 4 generations, moments of connection and consequence ignite and reignite as the century unfolds. 1917. On a battlefield near the river, John lies in the aftermath of a blast, unable to move or feel his legs. Struggling to focus his thoughts, he is lost to memory. A chance encounter in a pub by a railway, a hot bath with his lover on a winter night, his childhood on a faraway coast, as the snow falls. 1920. John has returned from war to North Yorkshire near another river, alive but not still whole. Reunited with Helena, an artist, he reopens his photography business and endeavors to keep on living. But the past erupts insistently into the present as ghosts begin to surface in his pictures, ghosts whose messages he cannot understand. It does sound really interesting, and I could really easily be convinced to read it. I feel like the barrier for entry for this one is that I've so consistently heard good things about Fugitive Pieces that I still feel like I would want to prioritize Fugitive Pieces before I would get to Held. But conversation about this book, once people begin reading the long list, could ultimately change that. There's a chance I would end up reading Held first and then catching up to Fugitive Pieces. I really just need to catch up to it. It's been such a long time that this has been in my library and I have not gotten around to reading it. And I would love to hear feedback from you if you have read Fugitive Pieces or Held, and let me know if you think I should catch up to Fugitive Pieces first or if I should just bite the bullet and think about reading Held, because it does sound like a very interesting book. My only thing is I feel like I'm being stubborn at this point wanting to get to the book that I haven't gotten to in 20 years. The next book on the Booker Longlist for 2024 is Creation Lake by Rachel Kushner. Now, this is actually not the book that I was thinking of when I said there's one book that has definitely not been released. However, Creation Lake has definitely not been released either. It says it's coming out September 5th, 2024 in the UK. I believe it's coming out somewhere around the same time in the United States. And this was actually featured in my video about exciting upcoming book releases for the last part of 2024. I'll link that video down below. And this is another situation where I feel like Creation Lake being published is just reminding me that I need to catch up to The Flamethrowers, Rachel Kushner's previous book. She has a couple of previous books that I feel like I need to catch up to. Telex from Cuba is also supposed to be really good, and I haven't read that one. But The Flamethrowers feels like the book most people talk about when they talk about Rachel Kushner, so I feel like, I don't know, would I read Creation Lake, or would I finally get around to reading The Flamethrowers? I feel like I would still probably want to get to The Flamethrowers. And part of that is that although I think Rachel Kushner is an author that I want to read, and Creation Lake does sound interesting, and part of me wants to read it because I feel like it's going to be in the mix for conversations about the best book of this year or best books of 2024. And now that it's on the Booker Longlist, I feel like it's definitely going to be part of those conversations. I'm a little hesitant about it. I feel like this is another case where I'm probably going to wait and see what other people say as they start working their way through the long list. And that's going to be a little difficult because it's not published yet. And actually, if it publishes on September 5th, when are they announcing the short list? Let's find out. Yeah, so the short list is going to be announced on Monday, September 16th. So that does not give people a lot of time to read Creation Lake before the shortlist is announced, but oh well. So here is what this one is about. A woman is caught in the crossfire between the past and the future in this part spy novel, part profound treatise on human history. Sadie Smith, a 34-year-old American undercover agent of ruthless tactics, bold opinions, and clean beauty, is sent by her mysterious but powerful employers to a remote corner of France. Her mission, to infiltrate a commune of radical eco-activists led by the charismatic Svengali Bruno Lacombe. Sadie casts her cynical eye over this region of ancient farms and sleepy villages, and at first finds Bruno's idealism laughable. He lives in a Neanderthal cave and believes the path to enlightenment is a return to primitivism. But just as Sadie is certain she's the seductress and puppet master of those she surveils, Bruno Lacombe is seducing her with his ingenious counter-histories, his artful laments, his own tragic story. A work of high art, high comedy, and irresistible pleasure from the author of the Booker Prize nominated The Mars Room. Obviously, The Mars Room is another big book of hers. I still feel like The Flamethrowers is kind of the one people most talk about. It feels like books about eco-terrorism and things like that are having a moment because Burnham Wood dealt with eco-terrorism as well last year. So, I don't know, it's just interesting that that is becoming such a thing. But it sounds interesting. I do feel like I'm going to be more likely to catch up to some of Rachel Kushner's older books, but I am interested in Creation Lake. And I just think when it comes to this list, there are other books that I would probably prioritize first. And my opinion about that could be changed once people are able to read Creation Lake and start, sharing their feedback on it as they read their way through the long list. The benefit of being someone who doesn't read the entire long list is that I can see what other people are saying about the list and the books on it, and it helps me pick and choose which ones I should prioritize, and it helps me pick and choose which ones might have better chances of making it onto the shortlist or ultimately winning. The next book is This Strange Eventful History, written by Claire Messud. I have a very rocky history with Claire Messud. She wrote a book called The Emperor's Children, which is a bit of a 9/11 novel, and I aggressively disliked that book. Like, I really hated that book. I read it not long after it was published, and I just disliked it to an extreme. But I did read another book of hers called The Woman Upstairs, and I thought that one was pretty good. I wouldn't say I loved it, but I thought it was pretty good. So there's one book of hers that I really aggressively hate, and there's one book of hers that I think is pretty good. And I haven't really gone any further than that. And I've heard some mixed things about this strange, eventful history, which is sort of inspired by Claire Messed's own family. So I had been starting to think like this is a book where I'm just going to let other people have this and I'm going to sit this one out. Now it's on the Booker long list, and it will be interesting because I feel like I had pretty well decided that I was going to sit this one out, and I'm probably going to stick to that. But if people read it and I start hearing more positive and less mixed things about this book, I could end up changing my mind. Here's what it says. This strange, eventful history charts the Cassars' unfolding story in a work of breathtaking historical sweep and vivid psychological intimacy. June 1940. As Paris falls to the Germans, Gaston Cassar, honorable servant of France, devoted husband and father, currently posted as naval attaché in Salonika, I hope I said that correctly, bids farewell to his beloved wife, aunt, and children, placing his faith in God that they will be reunited after the war. But escaping the violence of that cataclysm is not the same as emerging unscathed. The family will never again be whole. As the Cassars move between Salonika and Algeria, the US, Cuba, Canada, Argentina, Australia, and France, their itinerary is shaped as much by a search for an elusive wholeness as by the imperatives of politics, faith, family, industry, and desire. Which, I mean, the description alone sounds interesting. Part of what makes me want to hold off is my own rocky history with Claire Messed and the fact that I've seen some mixed to negative reviews of this book. I believe Roro Reads recently read this and was not a huge fan of it. So this is a case where I'm going to set it out. Maybe other people will change my mind and we'll just see how it goes. Now, Richard Powers is back. I feel like if he's releasing a book, you should reserve a spot for him on the Booker long list and probably shortlist, let's be real. This time he's here for Playground, his new book, which is also not yet released. And actually in the UK, the release date is September 26th, which is after the shortlist will be announced. And I don't off the top of my head know if the US release date, ignore my calendar, is the same, but I believe it's pretty close. So that's going to throw a wrench in a lot of long list readings for a lot of people, and short list readings as well. Richard Powers is a very notable author because Bewilderment was his last book, which was on the shortlist for the Booker Prize. I think a lot of people thought it might win that year. The Over Story is a book of his that won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction, and a lot of people really love. I did not finish The Over Story. I started it and didn't get there. For my Pulitzer Prize project, where I'm reading all of the books that have won a Pulitzer Prize for fiction, I will attempt a reread. Maybe soon, we'll see. I think when I attempt my reread, I might try it on audio and see if that works a little bit better for me. It's a brick of a book, so I will try again. And for that reason, also, I feel like I'm going to sit Playground out because I have other Richard Powers things I need to do, and I'll probably focus on that. Here's what they say about Playground. Playground explores that last wild place we have yet to colonize and interweaves profound themes of technology and the environment and a deep exploration of our shared humanity. Raffi and Todd are two polar opposites at an elite high school where they bond over a 3,000-year-old board game. Elsewhere, Evie Ballou sinks to the bottom of a swimming pool in Montreal, strapped to one of the world's first aqualungs. Aina Arroita grows up in naval bases across the Pacific with art as her only home. All of these people meet on the history-scarred island of Makatea in French Polynesia, marked for humanity's next great adventure, a plan to send floating autonomous cities out into the open sea. As the seasteaders close in, how will Evie play the ever-unfolding oceanic game? Will Aina engage in acts of destruction? Todd and Raffi, now estranged, still find themselves in competition. Todd unravels while working on an idea to redraw the boundaries of human immortality, while Raffi and the residents must decide if they will greenlight the new project on their shores and change their home forever. Which does sound interesting. Richard Powers is very uniquely interested in environmental stories, and definitely we've already seen at least one other book that is concerned with that. The Overstory is very heavily about environmental things, and I haven't read Bewilderment, but it's less environmental, I think, but the description of this book and of Overstory and Bewilderment, they all sound like they come from the same author. So it does feel like if you are someone who likes Richard Powers, of course you're going to end up liking Playground. The interesting thing is that it will not have been published by the time the shortlist is announced. The next book is one of the ones from an actual British author, Enlightenment by Sarah Perry, who is a notable author because she wrote The Essex Serpent, which a lot of people have liked, and I have kind of thought about reading but haven't gotten around to. But I've heard a lot of really good things about The Essex Serpent, and now here is Enlightenment. Here's what they say. A story of love and astronomy told over the course of 20 years through the lives of two improbable best friends. Thomas Hart and Grace Macaulay have lived all their lives in the small Essex town of Aldie. Though separated in age by 3 decades, the pair are kindred spirits, torn between their commitment to religion and their desire to explore the world beyond their small Baptist community. But their friendship is threatened by the arrival of love. Thomas falls for James Bower, who runs the local museum. Together, they develop an obsession with the vanished 19th century astronomer Maria Vaduva, said to haunt a nearby manor, who may have made startling astronomical discoveries that have never been acknowledged. Meanwhile, Grace meets Nathan, a fellow sixth former who represents a different, wilder kind of life. They are drawn passionately together, but quickly pulled apart, casting Grace into the wider world and far away from Thomas. Over the course of 20 years, by coincidence and design, Thomas and Grace will find their lives brought back into orbit as a devastating story of love and scientific pursuit unfolds and the mysteries of Aldie are revealed. I hadn't really heard of this book. And, I guess my shallow thing is that the fact that there appears to be a queer love story in here does make me a little more interested in reading it. But I definitely feel like there are other books on this long list that I would probably prioritize ahead of this one, although that could change. So if you've read Enlightenment, let me know what you thought of it. I know a lot of people have loved The Essex Serpent, but I haven't heard much about Enlightenment yet. And I know that's about to change since inclusion on the Booker long list is bound to change, something like that. So I could be persuaded to read Enlightenment. There is a spark of interest from that description, but I do feel like Wandering Stars is something that I feel like immediately off of the long list I have already wanted to read. So I feel like that is the most likely candidate that I would end up reading. But anyway, the next book is Orbital, written by Samantha Harvey. 6 astronauts rotate in the International Space Station. They are there to do vital work, but slowly they begin to wonder, what is life without Earth? What is Earth without humanity? Together, they watch their silent blue planet circling it 16 times, spinning past continents and cycling through seasons, taking in glaciers and deserts, the peaks of mountains and the swells of oceans. Endless shows of spectacular beauty witnessed in a single day. Yet although separated from the world, they cannot escape its constant pull. News reaches them of the death of a mother, and with it comes thoughts of returning home. They look on as a typhoon gathers over an island and the people they love, in awe of its magnificence and fearful of its destruction. The fragility of human life fills their conversations, their fears, their dreams. So far from Earth, they have never felt more part or protective of it. That does sound really interesting. This is a book that I really did not know anything about when it made the long list, so that description of it was actually my first experience of what this book is and is about. And it does sound fascinating. I don't think I'm immediately going to run out and seek a copy of it, but it does sound really interesting. So if you've read Orbital by Samantha Harvey, let me know what you thought of it, because that does sound interesting. I could see myself being convinced to read that book. The next one is one of the 2 books on the long list that I have already read. It's James by Percival Everett, and no surprise here, Percival Everett was a finalist for the Booker Prize for his book The Trees, and he had been a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction for his book before that one, which was called Telephone. And now James is out and sort of taking over the world. In the New York Times Best Books of the 21st Century Readers Edition, James was a book that was published in 2024 and made it onto the list of the best books of the 21st century, which is not something that any other book or author on this list can claim. I mean, authors can claim to have had books on the list, like Richard Powers, but nothing that was published in this year. Percival Everett is the only one who has that claim to fame. By the way, I'll have my link to my reaction of the readers list of the New York Times best 100 books of the 21st century down below. So I am absolutely not surprised to see this showing up on the Booker long list. I think this is another book that will be very heavily in the Pulitzer conversation when we get around to that next year. And I think it's a shoo-in for conversations about the best book of 2024, or best books, plural. Here's what they say: a profound meditation on identity, belonging, and the sacrifices we make to protect the ones we love, which reimagines the adventures of Huckleberry Finn. 1861, the Mississippi River. When the enslaved Jim overhears that he is about to be sold to a new owner in New Orleans and separated from his wife and daughter forever, he decides to hide on a nearby island until he can formulate a plan. Meanwhile, Huck Finn has faked his own death to escape his violent father, who recently returned to town. Thus begins a dangerous and transcendent journey by raft along the Mississippi River toward the elusive promise of free states and beyond. As James and Huck begin to navigate the treacherous waters, each bend in the river holds the promise of both salvation and demise. With rumors of brewing war, James must face the burden he carries, the family he is desperate to protect, and the constant lie he must live. And together, the unlikely pair must face the most dangerous odyssey of them all. I was a little more muted on James than other people have been. However, I do recognize that it is a tremendous novel. I am not surprised to see it here. I think it's a shoo-in for the shortlist. Honestly, I kind of think it has a good shot at the win, but we'll see how things develop over time. Not surprised to see James here at all. And by the way, here is The Trees. I had pulled my copy of it to hold up for you to go along with my discussion of James, but I forgot to do so. Trees is another book I've heard a lot of really good things about. Now we get to the second book on this list that I have read. It's The Safekeep by Yael van der Wouden. I will include a link to the Friday Reads video I did where I talk about this book in the description box down below. I read this in June because in June I read queer books and queer authors, and this was one of the books that I got in there. It had been one of my most anticipated books for the middle of 2024. It has a gorgeous cover, and I'm so happy to see it on this list. I thought this was a really great book. I love how this uses the structure of a psychological thriller to get at really heavy, weighty themes about war and identity and complacency and complicity. And I just think it's brilliant the way it does that. So let's see what they say about it, but I am so thrilled to see this book on the list. An exhilarating tale of twisted desire, histories, and homes, and the legacy of one of the 20th century's greatest tragedies. It's 15 years since the Second World War, and the rural Dutch province is quiet. Bomb craters have been filled, buildings reconstructed, and the conflict is well and truly over. Living alone in her late mother's country home, Isabel's life is as it should be, led by routine and discipline. But all is upended when her brother Louis delivers his graceless new girlfriend Ava at Isabel's doorstep as a guest, there to stay for the season. Ava is Isabel's antithesis. She sleeps late, wakes late, walks loudly through the house, and touches things she shouldn't. In response, Isabel develops a fury-fueled obsession, and when things start disappearing around the house, her suspicions spiral out of control. In the sweltering heat of summer, Isabel's desperate desire for order transforms into infatuation, leading to a discovery that unravels all she has ever known. The war might not be well and truly over after all, and neither Ava nor the house are what they seem. Such a good book. I don't know that it might make the shortlist. I would be happy if it does, because mostly I'm just really hoping that more people will read this book. It's so fun and interesting. I would say if you are a fan of Sarah Waters, The Safekeep will be a great book for you. So I'm so thrilled to see this book on this list. I don't know if it has chances to make the shortlist, but I'd be very happy to see it on the shortlist. We will find out in September if it ends up making it there. We have 3 more books on the long list. Next is My Friends by Hesham Matar, an intensely moving novel about 3 friends living in political exile and the emotional homeland that friendship can provide. Khalid and Mustafa meet at university in Edinburgh, 2 Libyan 18-year-olds expecting to return home after their studies. In a moment of recklessness and courage, they travel to London to join a demonstration in front of the Libyan embassy. When government officials open fire on protesters in broad daylight, both friends are wounded and their lives forever changed. Over the years that follow, Khalid, Mustafa, and their friend Hossam, a writer, are bound together by their shared history. If friendship is a space to inhabit, theirs becomes small and inhospitable when a revolution in Libya forces them to choose between the lives they have created in London and the lives they left behind. That does sound really interesting. I had seen this book around, but didn't really know all that much about it. And now I wish I had paid closer attention to it. It sounds interesting. It sounds like something I would like to read. Sounds like it has a lot of heft that could help propel it to the shortlist. So I won't necessarily be surprised to see it show up there once we get around to September. I don't know that I would run out and read it. I feel like I have other plans for August. So I'm probably going to wait to the shortlist before I really decide which of these books I want to read. But there's a good chance that that one will end up on my list. Now we get to a book I've never heard of until this long list was announced, Stoneyard Devotional, written by Charlotte Wood. The past comes knocking in Charlotte Wood's fearless exploration of forgiveness, grief, and female friendship. Burnt out and in need of retreat, a middle-aged woman leaves Sydney to return to the place she grew up, taking refuge in a small religious community hidden away on the stark plains of the Australian outback. She doesn't believe in God or knows what prayer is, and finds herself living a strange reclusive existence almost by accident. But disquiet interrupts this secluded life with 3 visitations. First comes a terrible mouse plague, each day signaling a new battle against the rising infestation. Second is the return of the skeletal remains of a sister who disappeared decades before, presumed murdered. And finally, a troubling visitor plunges the narrator further back into her past. It sounds really interesting. This is another case where I feel like the benefit of me not jumping into reading an entire long list or committing to reading an entire long list helps me out, because I'll probably wait until I have feedback. And again, I don't know that I will be jumping into any of these books except maybe Wandering Stars before the shortlist is announced anyway. So let me know if you have read Stoneyard Devotional and what you thought of it, and if you think it's something that I should prioritize, because it sounds interesting, but I feel like Wandering Stars and the last book on the long list are the 2 that I'm most readily able to get to. And that's an unfair thing, because I was really looking forward to reading both of them before the long list was announced. And books like Stoneyard Devotional might have to wait for those, but that's why I'm asking for feedback. If you've read it, let me know what you thought. So let's talk about that final book on the long list. It's Headshot, written by Rita Bullwinkle. Now, when this book was first announced, I was a little suspicious. It made it onto at least one of the lists that I did a reaction to that had the best books of 2024 so far. I believe it was the New York Times list, and I'll link that video down below if that is the one. Because the New York Times also did a book club episode about Headshot in June. And when it made the list, I believe my reaction to it was, it sounds really interesting, but I am not into boxing at all. So for that reason, I feel like I'm going to hold off and let this one pass me by. And the comments on that were, actually, you don't need to be a fan of boxing at all. In fact, you don't have to like boxing. And then the book club episode that the New York Times Book Review podcast did about Headshot was fascinating. I would encourage you to seek it out. Again, the New York Times Book Review podcast, it was toward the end of June, and it really got me interested. I immediately got on the hold list for Headshot at my library, and I am still waiting for my copy. Hopefully I will be getting it soon, because I would really like to read this book. Here's what they say. Funny, propulsive, obsessive, and ecstatic, Headshot is equal parts subtle and intense as it brings us to the sidelines of the boxing ring and above and beyond it. Headshot is the story of the 8 best teenage girl boxers in the United States, told over the 2 days of a championship tournament in Nevada and structured as a series of face-offs. As the girls' pasts and futures collide, the specific joy and violence of the sport comes to life with electric energy, and a portrait emerges of the desire, envy, perfectionism, madness, and sheer physical pleasure that motivates each of these young women to fight. This is a novel about the radicalness and strangeness of being physically intimate with another human when you are measuring your own body through competition against theirs. What does the intimacy of a physical competition feel like? What does it mean to walk through life in the bodies we've been given, and what does it mean to use those bodies with abandon? I even thought about purchasing a copy of this book just to get it into my library so I could read it maybe faster. and I didn't do it. Well, Montana Book Company, the t-shirt I'm wearing today, didn't have a copy of it. They were sold out of it when we were there. So that kind of saved me from spending money. But I've been really thinking about doing it, ordering a copy, say, from Montana Book Company, because it just sounds really interesting. I'm really looking forward to it. So of the books on the long list, Headshot and Wandering Stars are the two that I'm most excited to read, but that's also only because I've already read James and The Safekeep. Those would be pretty high up there as well. So I'm most excited to read Wandering Stars and Headshot once again. There are other books on here that I am really interested in. I just think Wandering Stars and Headshot are the ones that I am immediately interested in. In terms of what might make the shortlist, I think James has a really good shot. I don't think you can really deny Richard Powers. So Playground seems like it would be there. I feel like My Friends has a good shot at it. And then it starts to get a little tricky. I feel like those three, to me at least, feel like definites. I am a little biased because of my enthusiasm for them, but I'd love to see Headshot and Wandering Stars, and then that leaves one spot, and I don't really know what would do it. And since I don't really do Booker predictions, I'm just going to kind of leave it at that. Those are the ones that are standing out the most to me from this list. And let me know which ones stand out the most to you. In terms of what didn't make the list, I had seen people predicting that The Coast Road by Alan Murren might make it. I actually just finished this book and liked it, but it didn't. And I definitely think you could make a case for this book on the long list. I'm not altogether broken up that it's not here, because I do think this seems like an interesting enough list even without The Coast Road. But I did really like this book, and I might have put it on my own. I think the biggest omission that I can see is Martyr by Kaveh Akbar. Another one of the books that has been popping up on a lot of Best of the Year so far. It feels like this is destined to be in the conversation for Best Books of the Year. And I know it's been a bit of a cilantro book. Some people love it, some people hate it. But there's been enough energy and enthusiasm about it that it felt like this was a sure thing for the long list. And yet, here we are, and it's not here. So this is a big surprise to me to not see that on the list. I know a lot of people were hoping that Glorious Exploits by Ferdia Lennon would make it onto the list. Obviously, it did not. And that is a book that has been recommended to me a fair amount, so I might have to check it out. And I know Praiseworthy was another book that a lot of people had mentioned that they would like to see on the long list, and it is not here. So I'm feeling better about the Booker after my bitter Booker year last year. But let me know how you're feeling about this list. Again, I feel like we are definitely going to be having conversations about how many Americans are on this list. But let me know what you think overall of the list, what you think might make the short list, what you think might win, and what you would have liked to see here instead. Let me know all of that in the comment section down below. As always, I really appreciate your time, and I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.